Hey, how's it going, guys? I hope that this video finds you well as always. In today's video, we're going to be talking about photosynthesis, which I like to call life's ultimate reaction. So, what is the objective for this video? I want you to make sure that you take a close look at these objectives. It says that students will be able to investigate and explain cellular processes, including energy conversion. And when I talk about energy conversion, what we basically mean is how it is that organisms like plants are able to convert or change light energy into chemical energy that we can actually use. Now, this chemical energy often is in the form of glucose. Okay, so that's what we talk about when we say energy conversion. So basically going from a type of energy that is in the light to a chemical energy, which is in the form of glucose. And that's what photosynthesis is basically all about. Later on, we're going to talk about cellular respiration as well. Now, the essential question, make sure that you have this essential question on your paper. You're also more than welcome to write the one that I have on the board. It says, can I describe the process of photosynthesis as energy conversion? So please make sure that you think about this throughout this lecture. You have to be able to describe this process, specifically the reactants and the products. So what do you know about photosynthesis? The first part of this lecture, basically, the very first part of your notes, I want to ask you to write anything that you remember from intermediate, anything that comes to mind whenever you think about the process of photosynthesis, anything you know or anything that you remember. You can write some sentences there, some bullet points. You can even draw pictures of the process if you remember anything about it. So also, what I want you to do is make sure that you watch the video that is titled Intro to Photosynthesis. And I posted this video in Schoology. So please make sure that you watch that video, which is going to be very helpful to understand this process. Okay? Now, let's go over the definition of photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is basically a process in which light energy, water, and carbon dioxide are used to create glucose for energy. Now, if you wanted to break down the word a little bit, you have to remember that photo means light and synthesis is going to mean to make. So what it basically means is that we're making energy from a light source. Okay, just if you want to remember photo, light, synthesis, which is a word that you should remember by now, it means to make. Now, it says that all of life stems from this reaction. The reason why is because reason why we have an atmosphere full of oxygen is because this process has been going on for perhaps millions and millions and millions of years. Okay, some of the organisms that are able to do this photosynthesis, we obviously call them autotrophs, and I can spell this for you here, autotrophs. And the reason why it is important is because plants can do photosynthesis, and that's the one that we associate the most with photosynthesis. But you have to remember that some things, like for example, algae, which belong to the kingdom of Protista, they can also do photosynthesis. Now, there's even some bacteria that can do photosynthesis as well. So not just plants. Plants are the one that we know the most that do photosynthesis, and all plantae kingdom are going to do photosynthesis. But the kingdom of Protista, there's a lot of algae, for example, which are going to do photosynthesis, as well as bacteria, which are photosynthetic as well. So this is the chemical reaction for photosynthesis, and the chemical reaction is CO2 plus H2O goes to C6H12O6, which is glucose, plus O2. Now, another way this is the chemical equation, but another way we can just say that carbon dioxide plus water and light energy is going to be converted to glucose and oxygen. So those plus signs basically means and. So carbon dioxide and water and light energy all together is going to be converted to glucose and oxygen. One thing that you perhaps notice is these numbers here. Now, when you go to chemistry, you're going to learn how to balance chemical equations, and that's why we put these numbers in front of it, just so that the equation is balanced. But for now, just know that it's there to make both sides balanced. Okay, these right here will be your reactants. And then these will be your products. Reactants meaning what goes into the equation, and products meaning what comes out of the reaction. So basically, plants are going to get carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. They're going to get water through the roots all the way up the shoots, through the xylems, all the way to the leaves. And then they're going to get the light energy from the sun, like in this picture. They're going to get it right straight down from the sun. And then they're going to use those three items to basically produce glucose molecules, which they can store for later use. And as a result, also oxygen will be released back into the atmosphere. So a little more about plants and where it happens. So photosynthesis takes place in the chloroplast. So chloroplast is the organelle, and this is very important. The chloroplast is the organelle where photosynthesis takes place, and this is only found in the leaves of the plant. So it says that only the cells of the leaf have chloroplast. In eukaryotic cells, the chloroplasts contain specialized light-absorbing pigments. And what you need to know about pigments is that they're kind of like proteins. These are the ones that are going to be absorbing the sunlight from the atmosphere, okay, through these pigments. And some of the pigments that are found in these chloroplasts are basically called chlorophyll A, which is a pigment that makes the plants or the flowers or the the leaves appear to be green. And this is the most important photosynthetic pigment, which I actually want you to remember the name of this pigment, chlorophyll A, which absorbs blue and red light. So what happens is that most of the time, whenever blue and red light from the sun comes in, it is absorbed through the leaf. And if there's any green light, which is always coming in, it's going to be coming in, but yet it's going to bounce off, and it's going to be absorbed by the chlorophyll A pigment. And the reason why plants appear green is because as it bounces off, then that's going to be reflected on your eyes, and that is why you see plants that appear green, okay? But the lights that it's going to be absorbing is blue and red light from the sun, basically. So there's some other type of pigments as well that are not so important to remember, but perhaps chlorophyll B, so another one that you can remember, which also is going to absorb blue and red light. And there are other pigments which are not so important. I would just make sure that we remember chlorophyll A and B, but these are not so important. The keratin or carotenoids, which are basically going to make the leaves appear yellow, so like during autumn. And then xenophils, which is basically what makes them sometimes look yellowish, reddish. Okay, but these are not so important. I would rather focus my time on remembering that chlorophyll A and B are going to absorb blue and red light. All right, so some factors that affect photosynthesis. It says that sunlight, obviously, is going to be the amount of sunlight that is available, and the color of the light is going to affect how much photosynthesis the plants are going to produce. So plants do not use green light, they reflect it. And again, that's why we actually look at plants and they appear green. If you look at the spectrum of waves, most of the light that they absorb is blue and red, and when you look at the greens here, they don't absorb any of it. So another thing that affects the amount of photosynthesis that plants do is temperature. So as temperature increases, photosynthesis will also increase, but only up to a certain point. Obviously, the temperature gets way too high. The higher the temperature means higher rate of transpiration or water loss. So eventually, the plant is not going to be able to do photosynthesis anymore. Availability of water, and also the availability of carbon dioxide. Although carbon dioxide is not a huge deal, because in most plants, since they're out in the open, the atmosphere is filled with carbon dioxide. In fact, we have way too much carbon dioxide, but it can be a factor as well. Some people say that the more carbon dioxide, the better, but in fact, it doesn't really matter. It's kind of like having excessive amounts of food, right? You can only eat until you get full. Plants are the same way with carbon dioxide. If there's not a lot of water, that's also going to affect the amount of photosynthesis. So, structure of the chloroplast. The chloroplast is an organelle in which photosynthesis takes place. Animal cells do not have chloroplast, obviously. It is a double membrane organelle, which means it has two membranes, and it's green because it contains chlorophyll A, B, and so on. So these are just the different parts. Make sure that you label some of these parts. One granum is basically one of these stalks right here. We call this a granum. And then within them, you're going to have a thylakoids, which is basically where photosynthesis is going to take place. Those are thylakoids there, those little discs inside of them. A grana is just a multiple granum. So this is just what we call that. All right. So just to look at the different parts of the chloroplast. All right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at the chemical process of photosynthesis, and it occurs in two main phases. Okay. We call one the light reaction, and the other one we call it the dark reaction, or AKA the Calvin cycle after the person who found it. Now, the light reactions are the photo part of the photosynthesis, which is basically where light from the sun is going to be absorbed by the different pigments like chlorophyll A and B. During the dark reaction is basically the synthesis part of the process where the making is happening. And this is where trapped energy from the sun is converted to the chemical energy of sugar. Okay, so the light reaction, what you need to know is that it occurs in the light is necessary for it, and the dark reaction, light is absolutely not necessary for it. So what happens during the light reaction specifically? Well, light reaction occurs in the thylakoids of the chloroplast, which is inside of those little granules. It actually happens in the membrane of those little things, the thylakoids. Here, light and water are required for this process. So these are going to be the reactants, the light and the water. These are the two reactants. And what it's going to produce is energy in the form of ATP and NADPH, just a little bit of it. Also, oxygen will be made as a waste product. So the reactants for this light reaction are basically the light and the water that is required for it. And it's going to be making a little bit of ATP and NADPH together with oxygen, which is going to be released into the atmosphere. So the next part is the dark reaction. This is the next step, where it actually occurs in the stroma, which is kind of like a cytoplasm. It's kind of like the inside of the, or the empty space inside of the chloroplast, okay? And inside there, what's going to happen is that carbon dioxide is going to be fixed into the sugar that we call glucose in a process called carbon fixation. So when we talk about dark reaction, this is where carbon fixation occurs. And basically the ATP and NADPH that we made during the light reaction are going to be used to power the process of making those glucose molecules to be the final product of it. Okay, so just to recap all together, okay, what you need to understand is that during the first part of photosynthesis, which occurs in those thylakoids, you have H2O and sunlight. They're going to be used in those thylakoids to make a little bit of ATP and a little bit of NADPH, and they're going to release oxygen gas as a result of it. Now, what it's going to do is that it's going to use that ATP and NADPH to take it to the Calvin cycle or the dark reaction, and it's going to use it together with carbon dioxide to make the final product that we need for photosynthesis, which is the glucose molecule. Okay, so just to recap this picture right here is going to be very, very useful. So just keep this in mind. But also, if you need to write some of these things down, be sure to do so as well. Okay, now as a result, we have, this little reaction here, which basically shows you that carbon dioxide and water together with sunlight is going to go to glucose and oxygen. But keep in mind that that happens during the light reaction and the dark reaction as so. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some questions here, and what I want you to do is make sure that you answer those questions. So the oxygen that is released as O2 during photosynthesis came from what molecule? And the answer is A, water. Make sure that you answer that. So the next one, it says, in addition to sunlight, what else is required for photosynthesis to take place? The answer here is carbon dioxide and water. And the last question is, what organelle is responsible for photosynthesis in plants and algae? And this is chloroplast. Remember that chlorophyll is the pigment that absorbs the light. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this video here, guys. Make sure that you answer some of these questions. I will see you on the next one. Best of luck.